What's cracking, everybody? XehrFelrose here, bringing you some Pokemon Go Battle League content, and in today's video we're going to be taking a look at my favorite picks and teams for the upcoming Ultra League Fantasy Cup. If you're watching this on release, it's coming out today, and it allows Dragon, Steel, and Fairy type Pokemon in the Ultra League format. So naturally, we'll be taking a look at my top 5 teams, or variations of those teams, so to speak. And we'll also be taking a look at some of my favorite picks overall that you can build teams around on your own if you're so daring. So we'll take a look at these rankings real quick and just get right into it here. So a few things that jump off the screen to me. Obviously, you've got your top 3 or 4 that are always going to be good picks. Registeel, obviously dominant. Tapu Fini has very few counters in this meta. If you were to look at Tapu Fini versus the entirety of the meta, it has very, very few actual losses. Now, obviously, this is only counting certain top meta picks, but when your losses are literally Florges and Weezing being obviously neutral matchups because they have to be running the Moonblast or the Fairy, or the Play Rough, the Fairy Nuke, so to speak. And then Registeel and Magnezone are obviously hard counters to it already, but Magnezone has to land the wild charge. So, when your wins look like that, or your losses look like that, rather, in the one shield scenario, Tapu Fini is looking pretty good, but this is all on paper. There are other picks that I'd like to point out here, one of them being Giratina Origin. Most people will go straight to Altered because they're used to it, and it's very bulky, but Origin puts out a lot of damage, has the same typing, and also can just chew through things that don't outright counter it because of that Shadow Ball, doing neutral damage to just about everything in this meta, if not better, because there's not really any darks or any normal types in this meta. So taking a look back at the rankings here, we've got, we've talked about Origin, Giratina, and Tapu Fini. I think Burn Drive Genesect could be a super fun spice pick with that Techno Blast Fire type, able to melt through some of the steels, has Magnet Bomb for the fairies, and obviously Dragon types don't necessarily hit very hard into steel types typically anyway. So Galarian Weezing, if you guys have it, I mean, it's really, really good. You saw my Ultra League video for Greninja a couple days ago. I would really recommend having a Weezing to just have in your roster because the thing is so good. And we've had a lot of opportunities for coughing spawns lately, so I'm hoping that you're able to have gotten one or grind out one. All you need is like a lucky traded one. That's what mine is. It's just the best lucky trade that I had to get close to 2,500. You don't have to min-max the IVs that much. Trust me, it's fine. And obviously Alolan Sandslash is another amazing pick. It's just completely meta at this point, and it just, if you don't hard counter it, it can do really well into your team. So, but looking a little bit further down, Turtonator keeps popping up on my list as core breakers, and at this point, if any of you have Turtonator, good for you, because there's no way I have not grinded that hard to get a Turtonator, and I don't plan to. Clefable coming up as another Pokemon that I like a lot, and I'm only going to go maybe 1 or 2 more of these Pokemon. I'm going to go too deep in the rankings. The meta's not that big, but Clefable with Moonblast and Meteor Mash allows it to hit 2 pieces of the triangle of the meta, being the dragons and the fairies. It really only has to worry about being walled up again, or being hit by a steel type where it would be walled. So Berserker and Melmetal are 2 more that I'm going to put out here before we get into the teams. Berserker having such a diverse move pool makes it really, really good in this meta. Shadow Claw is also amazing. And Close Combat and Play Rough allow it to hit the entire triangle, right? Play Rough will hit this, it'll hit the fairies somewhat neutral, and it'll be able to hit the dragons for super effective, and you have Close Combat for the steals. So it has good play into everything for just the most part. It's just kind of on the weaker, frail side. And then the last thing I want to point out is Melmetal, which normally we don't think about, but Double Iron Bash and Superpower allow this thing to hit all 3 pieces of the triangle without having to sacrifice its moveset or anything. The only obviously downside for Superpower is it debuffs you. So perhaps you make a team where Melmetal's in the lead or as a closer, but Double Iron Bash is a very strong move, and you get to it very quickly, and it can really hammer out those fairy types. So let's take a look at the first team. I actually started my my bid on Team 5 here. So this is my last team that I was supposed to have, but I forgot to change the scene beforehand. So let's take a look at a double ground team with Weezing in the lead. Now, there's always going to be some core breakers, right, to these teams. Nothing is perfect, right? But this is a bit more on the spicier side. I usually show this. I was going to show this team last again, so forgive me. We're going to go back up to team 1, or maybe I'll just go up the list. Who knows? We'll see. You're going to get 5 teams regardless of what order they're in. So this team, it really hinges on the Weezing being in the lead. Galarian Weezing is one of the best leads in my opinion. Able to use Play Rough and Overheat. It hits everything. It hits the fairies. It hits the steels. It hits the dragons. And it's so good at what it does. And if you put behind it Flygon, which is in one of my opinion, if you can get a Shadow Flygon, I don't have a Shadow Flygon, I wish I did. But if you have a Shadow Flygon, in my opinion, it might be one of the best closers in the in Ultra Fantasy because of the fact that it has Mud Shot, has Earth Power on Legacy, and it has Dragon Claw. And those are 3 things that allow it to just rip through some teams that are not suspecting it if you save it shields and give it some energy. And Steelix is back there as a safe swap to lure out the Tapu Fini and also just grind through a matchup if it needs to with Psychic Fangs. If you have a Shadow, you can use a Shadow. I don't have a Shadow. I'm nowhere near the XLs for my Shadow. So an adjustment you could make to this team, I mean, Flygon's pretty unique. And Steelix is pretty unique. I don't really feel like you could just straight substitute. But Weezing, if you wanted to, you could put something that's a little bit harder of an answer on the lead to Tapu Fini. I wouldn't hate that. Also, Alolan Sand Slash. You got to have something that can really tangle with that Sand Slash. So, but that being said, the team's got really good coverage on the meta. Everything on this team beats something in the meta. So you're not going to be completely core broken by anything really. There'll be at least one Pokemon on your team that can handle whatever you're having trouble with. But Steelix being about the only thing that is a bit of a pain just because of how awkward it is for Weezing to deal with. And Steelix obviously into itself is kind of miserable. So I don't expect to see a whole lot of Steelix though, just because Registeel exists. And that by itself is going to ward off a lot of the other Steels that can't hit back. But Earthquake from Steelix will still do some damage. So let's take a look at the next team here. And we're going to go back up to number 1, and I'm going to flip this. I am so slow right now, forgive me. The Melmetal, right, and Giratina. So here's a team with both of them, and you have Registeel here as the safe swap. Has a good coverage and good score on PV Poke here. And Registeel with Flash Cannon does beat Origin Giratina on the ones. However, in my humble opinion, there will be so many people like myself that only have one Registeel built and do not want to sacrifice the Zap Cannon. So you'll probably see a lot more people either running Flash Cannon, Zap Cannon, or just going straight with Focus Blast, Zap Cannon. Which means Giratina Origin is primed and pumped to really core break people trying to run the Tapu Fini Registeel core because it goes through them so well. It resists the damage from Registeel's charge moves, and it resists the water guns from Tapu Fini, which makes that matchup very comfy, especially when shields are involved. Obviously, yes, if it takes a Moonblast, not really going to have a good time. But the one thing that you will want to worry about are things that can core break this include, straight Dragonite and Como-O because of the fact that they have the Dragon Fighting typing. They can kind of chew through this stuff. And Registeel itself is sort of good into this line, but again, that's assuming that the opponent's Registeel is not running Flash Cannon. And even then, Flash Cannon isn't like the end of the world for Giratina. It can comfortably tank one. It's just because the lock-ons plus the next Flash Cannon will KO. So we're not going to really look into Zygarde. I mean, if you got one, good for you. But most people probably don't have one, so we're going to ignore it. And then, like I said, Chartnator keeps coming up. But after that, you've got coverage on just about everything in the meta, and I cannot get over just how good Origin Giratina is. If you have one saved or built, it's absolutely worth a try. So let's look at this next team here that I've put together as Cavalier Double Fairy. So the whole point of this team here is to use Clefable as your sweeper because it breaks so many different things apart. And if you're not locked in against Registeel, Clefable can really go off. It gets to the Moonblast and Meteor Mashes so quick, and those do still do quite a bit of damage, even against a Steel type that it might be locked into. Like, for example, some of the squishier Steel types, like Melmetal. Double Iron Bash still hurts, though. But you also have things like a Cavalier, Scizor, which is another one I completely forgot about until just now as I mentioned it. Scizor, by the way, probably going to be a really good core breaker. I really look forward to seeing what people can do with Scizor in this meta because it looks so good. But the point of this here is to use your Slurpuff, which is that's a Registeel. That is not what I was supposed to put there. Let's put this back. We are not running ABA Steel in this planet. No, it's Double Fairy. Slurpuff is very good in this meta. I just finished building one. You'll see a video on the channel about some battles I did with it, which, spoiler alert, I had to pre-record some battles with the members of my Discord, so the team videos that you'll see for the next couple of days on this meta, still very good teams, but I wasn't able to bring them into GBL because I'm going to be at GoFest, and I'm going to be visiting my family, so I won't really have a chance to play GBL, but I wanted to make sure I got some teams out for you guys. So, talking a little bit too long here. We still got a couple more teams to get through here, but the point of this team here is to use Slurpuff with Flamethrower as a way to lure out a Registeel that doesn't want to see the XehrFelrose, and that hopefully frees up Clefable to sweep the end game with shields. Tapu Fini into this team is a very bit scary, but overall it can be managed with the fairy types. XehrFelrose, when it runs Acid Spray, it gets to the Drill Run afterwards, and that comes very close to taking out a Tapu Fini as well. The same goes for really most of the fairies. Like XehrFelrose's Steel typing really helps it against a lot of the Tapu Finis, and the other fairy types doesn't really help it, but forces them to go for Surf rather than Moonblast rather. So it does help it against a lot of the fairy types. But Solgaleo is a very huge core breaker for this team because the fire spins will chew through the XehrFelrose, and then obviously against a fairy type, Solgaleo does go off. And I do like Solgaleo, but I do feel like it kind of fell off at the end of the last time we had this meta. So if you have one, give it a try. You might be surprised. It was very good for me when we had it, but at the same time, last time we had this meta, it was week 1 of the season, or week 2. It was one of the early weeks, and it was really hard to gauge just how good that meta was and how good the stuff in the meta was when you're facing literally the widest gap of skill of players. You're playing against, ace rank, and then you're playing against the next game, you're playing against somebody in Legend, and then you're playing somebody who's regularly at rank 20, and then you go back to playing somebody in Expert, and it's hard to gauge consistently. So this is going to be a really good test of this meta, I think, and I really enjoyed it last time it was here. There's a lot of good picks. These 3 typings make a very nice little triangle that isn't super RPS because there's tons of things that can break it. But this team, again, very good. You want to use the safe swap Slurpuff, take it out, take out the Registeel, and then you got Clefable in the back to sweep. So let's take a look at another team with Clefable in it because I love Clefable, right? Clefable, Como, Registeel. Now, normally I try to make it so that my teams all have unique Pokemon. So when you see, most of the time you can see like a fairy type. Like you can swap out Slurpuff for Weezing. Clefable's kind of hard to swap out because it has Meteor Mash, but like you could take Como out for Haxorus. You could take Registeel out for Berserker, or most other, Melmetal, things that do similar things. If you don't have, because I know a lot of people don't have all these XLs built. I am a very unique individual in that I have a lot of XLs built because I took a ton of my resources over the course of many seasons, especially since XLs came out, and I dedicated a lot of work into my Ultra League roster, which is why I have so many of these things built. But Como is a really good core breaker here because it has all that pressure from the Dragon Claws, Dragon Tails, and then having close combat to close things out is really nice. So there's not really a set strategy here as far as like using a safe swap to bait a Pokemon out. What you're doing here is you're playing the balanced team game, right? We're playing all 3 sides of the triangle and just hoping to make things happen with like good energy management, shields. Registeel is always a good safe swap because it's usually going to get shield advantage for you. But for the most part, you're looking at basically just playing a game out, trying to, hope that you just don't get hard RPS, right? Like a Registeel and then a Fairy and then a Haxorus. Like that would just be a miserable matchup for this team. But overall, it has a lot of play, has a good A for coverage, and it has play into everything in the meta, which is what I like to see when I play a team. Now, when I look at things, if I do have teams that are weak to the meta, I always want to make sure, and this is a little team building tip for any of you who are still watching this video at 14 minutes, which thank you, by the way, if you do. And all my teams and all of my strategies are typically in my Discord on my Patreon and becoming a YouTube member. So if this interests you and you want to get into that server, please check those links out. They're in the description and the pinned comment, as well as coaching. I'll be opening that up on the 1st in September when I come back from vacation. So a little team building tip that I like to give out is when you're looking at things in the threats section, you want to make sure that the things at the top are not super dominant, or you have game plans around those things. Like Tapu Fini, yes, it sucks, but if I saw one, I know the Clefable has a decent time against it. Como also not terrible because it resists the water guns, but again, you know, that's something that you just want to keep in the back of your mind. Como, yes, it's not great because the fairy typing kind of walls its entire moveset, but you're hoping that between Clefable and Registeel, you're able to avoid that alignment. So let's take a look at the last team, which is, in my opinion, the best team for the Fantasy Cup. It's going to be Alolan Sandslash, going to be Giratina and Tapu Fini in the back. I feel like these two make the best core with Alolan Sandslash, and I think Alolan Sandslash is primed to be the best Pokemon in the meta. I'm a huge preference towards my Shadow. I don't even think I have a regular one built, and if I do, I never use it, because Alolan Sandslash is already a win hard, lose hard kind of Pokemon, so adding the Shadow just gives it that much more punch, and I think it just makes the Pokemon better. Now, I run this team with an Origin Form Giratina, but we couldn't leave Six-Legged Fatina out. And yes, you know, if you watch Zionic's video, I love that guy. Shout out to Zionic for being a real man, real bro. The Tina in the back is a good safe swap. I definitely like the Shadow Claw version. I'm not running Dragon Breath in this meta because there's just obviously Steel and Fairy don't, you know, they wall the Dragon Breath. So I'm hugely preferring, God, I can't speak, Shadow Claw here. And then I would even go as far as saying run Shadow Force, to be honest. Shadow Sneak and Dragon Claw do the same damage, but Shadow Sneak has more energy. So if you're going to run a Ghost move, run Shadow Force. I'm all for it, because that's why I like the Origin Form Giratina, because it has Shadow Ball and it can just hit things that much harder. So if you have the closing power of Shadow Force with this team, I feel like you could do a lot with it. So let's take a look at the scorecard real quick. I have a shiny because I hate the quality of the gift that is used for the regular, but again, I much prefer Shadow Sandslash here with that Legacy Shadow Claw, because unfortunately Powder Snow, I almost want to say some icicle something, I don't know. Powder Snow is not a really amazing thing in this meta. Now, you're going to notice that Registeel does technically beat the whole team. It's false. If you know the Sandslash matchup, you know that you have plenty of play into. No, Siri, I'm not trying to talk to you. Go away. I just see my phone light up and Siri's trying to listen to me. Like, no, stop. Sandslash is able to core break a lot of things, and it does have a lot of play against Registeel, especially as a Shadow. That first drill run does just so much damage that you can start getting away, and if you bank some energy, then you swap out into the Giratina and you know, you absorb energy, and there's a lot of things you can do with that core that really helps. And then Tapu Fini, you know, if you can land that first drill run, Tapu Fini is then able to even get it down into Surf range. So you have a lot of play with the Sandslash as long as you don't get hard counter, which is not really a whole lot of counter users outside of like Lucario and Escavalier, and then there's the fire users. You'll see maybe Heatran, or you'll see Solgaleo, but there's very few actual hard counters to Sandslash in this meta. That's why I like it so much. And then Tapu Fini just covers it, and as does the Giratina. So guys, that's going to do it for this video. I hope that these teams are going to help you grind up to Legend, because I think that this one especially, but all these teams have a lot of play. I think that they're all going to do well. Again, in this kind of team, like, you know, I prefer the Origin Form Giratina, but I also don't mind having that thickness of the Six-Legged Fatina. And then Tapu Fini covers all of Sandslash's weaknesses, but again, if you're looking for something else, you could certainly use, you know, something along the lines of the Weezing. But I feel like this is a good, like, you already have the Sandslash built, let's be honest. And if you don't, like, you should have the XLs from the Com Day. And at this point, most people have either just said screw it and built a regular, or they waited and built a Shadow, which is what I would like to think that most of you who watch my channel have done, because you know I love Shadows. And if not, that's okay. Normal is still okay and it's usable. Don't feel bad. It's good to have both in case you ever need it. But the Tapu Fini is just dominant in this meta after you get rid of one of its hard counters, which, you know, typically if you're playing the Fat Tina, you may very well draw out a Registeel. So that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'm going to catch you in the next one. Bye-bye.